and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. Treasury chief says Washington is close to finalizing a trade deal with South Korea, saying he expects it to happen in the next 10 days. Senior Korean officials are now heading to the U.S. for follow-up trade negotiations. A response team sent by the South Korean government is now in Cambodia, as Seoul works to address recent kidnapping and confinement crimes targeting South Koreans there. The government also raised its travel advisory, banning travel to certain parts of the Southeast Asian country. As part of efforts to tame housing prices, the Lee administration rolled out new measures aimed at curbing borrowing and tighten access to home loans. Starting today, all areas of Seoul City and Gyeonggi-do Province will be designated as regulated zones and face stricter mortgage limits. We begin this morning with trade talks between South Korea and the United States, which appears to be reaching its final stage as officials on both sides suggest a deal is imminent. Negotiators from Seoul are in Washington this week, working to iron out the remaining details. Our Muniran starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump said that South Korea has signed a deal to make an upfront payment to invest in the United States. The remarks came as Seoul and Washington continue to negotiate the terms of their trade and investment agreement reached in July. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday local time, Trump added that Japan has pledged $650 billion and South Korea $350 billion. In reality, Japan's investment commitment stands at $550 billion, and Seoul has already pushed back on the idea of a direct cash payment, warning it could trigger financial instability. Trump's comments came just hours after U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CNBC that Washington is in the process of wrapping up talks with South Korea, suggesting that the two sides are close to finalizing their negotiations and ironing out the details. At another press conference, he said that he expects something from trade talks to come within the next 10 days. When asked whether the U.S. is willing to offer South Korea an unlimited currency swap, he drew a line, saying it is a matter for the Federal Reserve. However, he added that if he were the Fed chair, South Korea would already have a currency swap facility similar to Singapore's. Meanwhile, South Korea's Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol, who is in the U.S. to attend the G20 finance ministers meeting, also hinted that an agreement is within reach.
We're coordinating at a very fast pace. I believe we need to take every possible measure and respond comprehensively, such as my meeting with U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent and the others meeting Commerce Secretary Lutnick.
Top negotiators Kim Yong-bum, Presidential Chief of Policy, and Kim Jong-kwan, Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, are scheduled to arrive in Washington on Thursday night local time for follow-up tariff negotiations. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Heads of South Korea's major conglomerates are heading to the United States this week at the invitation of SoftBank Group Chairman Masayoshi Son. During the gathering, they'll discuss cooperation on the massive $500 billion Stargate project, which aims to build a nationwide AI data center network in partnership with OpenAI and Oracle. Samsung's Lee Jae-yong and Hyundai's Chung Hee-sun, currently in Japan for a trilateral economic dialogue, are expected to travel to the United States soon. SK Group's Choi Tae-won will reportedly depart on Thursday, and LG's Koo Kwang-mo is also expected to join. Their visit will coincide with a Washington trip by senior Korean officials for follow-up tariff negotiations. Industry watchers say the business leaders' presence could help strengthen Korea's bargaining position by showcasing new U.S. investment plans. And on the domestic front, the Lee administration has unveiled another set of measures to stabilize the overheated housing market in the capital region. The regulations are set to put all Seoul districts in speculative zones starting today, along with stricter mortgage rules. Our Park Jun-an reports.
After introducing loan restrictions in June and a housing supply plan in September, the South Korean government on Wednesday announced the third phase of its housing stabilization measures. Starting Thursday, all 25 Seoul districts and 12 regions in Gyeonggi-do province where investment is actively concentrated will be considered zones subject to regulations. The plan has been introduced to prioritize residential stability by balancing both demand and supply.
To ensure housing stability, the government will manage the real estate market in a balanced manner, considering both supply and demand, while imposing actual residency requirements for home purchases and strengthening regulations on loans and taxation.
Those include new loan-to-value ratio rules for the 37 affected regions, which will be lowered from the current 70% to 40%, meaning homebuyers must provide at least 60% of the purchase price in cash. Also, a new mortgage limit will be implemented when borrowing money. The money a buyer could borrow can range anywhere between 200 million won to 600 million won. If someone wants to buy a house that is worth 1.5 billion won, the maximum amount of money they could leverage is 600 million won. If someone wants to buy a house that is worth 1.5 billion won, the maximum amount of money they could leverage is 600 million won. However, the mortgage limit will be capped at 400 million Korean won for homes valued at over 1.5 billion and up to 2.5 billion. Lastly, the cap will be fixed at 200 million won for those above 2.5 billion. Under the new regulation, as the value of a purchased house increases, the maximum loan amount permitted decreases, effectively lowering the loan-to-value ratio. The government plans to carefully review real estate tax reforms while stepping up measures to curb illegal transactions and speculative demand, aiming to restore order in the housing market. Park Junan, Arirang News.
So both South Korea and the United States are seeking a breakthrough on trade issues ahead of President Donald Trump's visit to South Korea for the APEC leaders meeting. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Shin Se-don, professor at the Division of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University. Professor Shin, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
So senior officials from South Korea are now heading to Washington for tariff negotiations. And the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually said if he were the Fed chair, Korea would already have a currency swap facility. What's your take on this? How do you think these trade talks will unfold?
Well, I think it is pretty good news because after the initial agreement in July, everybody believed that the tariff negotiation has been over. But in fact, because of the friction between the two administrations, we haven't come to a final agreement between the two government. But now, on both sides of the government, they are saying that the final agreement is very, very near, or I think within 10 days. What is important is what is in the agreement. In other words, what is the core elements of the negotiations, between the two nations. I think most important thing is about the $350 billion investment project that American government has been asking for. And the Trump administration asked upfront, $350 billion in cash, but which is out of the possibility of Korean government. So there has been, I think, pretty hard negotiations between the two administrations, and we are interested to know whether $350 billion is reduced, or what about the upfront cash payment. And another point I think is what is going to be the tariff? Is it going to be 25%, or it is going to be 15% or lower? That is another important issue. And last, I think, which is I think most important thing, is whether the swap agreement, which has not been in existence for a long time, whether there would be an agreement to end the swap arrangement, which is in the authority of the Federal Reserve, which is not the American government. So I think there are many things that we have to look at, what will be included in the agreement. I think that is most important.
Right, a lot of things to consider. We'll have to see if they do agree on an agreement over the next 2 weeks. And globally, trade tensions between the United States and China have been escalating, and they're now directly affecting Korean companies, as China has now imposed sanctions on Korean shipbuilder Hanwha Ocean, accusing it of helping the U.S. What's your take on this?
Well, China has imposed Chinese version of Section 301 protection, which is the protection against unfair trades. In this case, I think China is thinking that Korean firms, in this case, Hanwha groups is playing a kind of unfair trade against China, banning Chinese firms to trade or to cooperate with 5 U.S. subsidiaries of Hanwha, mostly shipbuilding and shipping companies. If the Chinese restriction is limited to Hanwha, I think it's not going to be a pretty big deal. But what if China is extending that to other Korean companies like Samsung, LG, or Hyundai? I think that could be a pretty devastating blow to Korean economy. So we have to see what is the real intention of Chinese kind of regulations against Hanwha Group. We have to see.
Right, absolutely. And as for the domestic economy, the Korean government announced another set of plans to tame housing prices. In all areas of Seoul City and Gyeonggi-do Province now face much stricter regulations, including mortgage rate caps. How effective do you think this will be in cooling down housing prices?
Well, in principle, either current administration or the old previous administration, they have mostly 3 major policy measures. One is loan control, and second is declaring a regulation zone, and third one is adjusting tax profiles, and lastly, the supply measures. And we already saw, in the second measure of the current administration, government has announced that they will be supplying, almost 1.5 million in houses within 5 years. So supply policy has been already announced. And second, the loan control, I think, has been included in the first measure, and that is limited to 600 million won. No matter how expensive, you cannot borrow more than 600 million won. Now, this time they control to 400 400 million won for the when you buy the houses, the value of 1.5 and 2.5 billion. And if you want to buy more expensive than 2.5 billion won, you can borrow only 200 million won. I think that is the most important part in this government measure. Another, I think, most important part is government announced the regulation zone. If regulation zone is declared, there are many controls. The loan amount, loan rate, transactions. You have to get the permission from the local authorities. So in this measure, I think the loan control limiting to 200 million on the most expensive houses, and also the declaring the regulations zone for the entire Seoul and the 12 local districts of Gyeonggi Province. I think so. I think this measure is pretty severe, and effect whether that's going to be effective in controlling the housing prices, we have to see.
Right, much severe, much stricter than the previous 2 policies under the Lee Jae-myung administration. And the government even said it's also considering tax reforms related to property holding and transaction taxes. And these changes could have a major impact on the housing market, right? Would you say this signals a shift from the government's previously cautious stance on real estate taxation?
Right. I think this is the last, measures that a previous government had announced, Moon Jae-in or Yoon Suk-yeol administration has announced, but the Lee Jae-myung administration has not been announcing the measures regarding tax. But sooner or later, I think, if the price is not controlled effectively, then the current government is going to announce a tax kind of measures to control housing prices. Most important thing is, previous Moon Jae-in government had announced exactly the same measures about 5 years ago. And the problem is, it was not successful in controlling the prices of the houses. So the fundamental question is whether, the house prices will be controlled even with the tax problems. I think that we have to see. And to me, most important thing is interest rate is too low, and everybody is expecting lower interest rate in the future. I think that is the critical problem making a surge in housing prices. So I think the government and the Bank of Korea should not lower interest rate, at least for the time being, while the housing prices control. So interest policy is, to me, the most important measure.
Right, a lot of things to consider and a very difficult issue indeed. All right, Professor Shin, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Concerns are rising following the recent death of a Korean college student who was tortured by an organized crime gang in Cambodia. The South Korean government now estimates that around 1,000 Koreans are involved in so-called job scams in the country. In response, the government has raised the travel advisory level, including banning travel to certain regions, and has dispatched a joint response team to the area. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
A joint response team dispatched by the government arrived in Cambodia on Wednesday to respond to recent kidnapping and confinement crimes targeting South Koreans. The team, led by Second Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jin-ah, spoke to reporters upon arrival at Techo International Airport.
We will visit the Cambodian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Interior and Online Scam Response Committee, and by engaging with high-level officials, we will discuss more specific and proactive solutions to this situation.
South Korea is also stepping up efforts to bring back some 60 nationals detained by Cambodian authorities in connection with job scams. National Security Advisor Wee Sung-rak said Wednesday that the government aims to repatriate them by this weekend. According to Wee, around 60 Korean suspects are currently being held by Cambodian law enforcement after a crackdown on illegal job networks. Separately, the Foreign Ministry says roughly 80 Koreans are either missing or their safety cannot be confirmed. Meanwhile, a South Korean woman in her 30s was found dead near the Vietnam-Cambodia border on October 8th. Local police say an autopsy found no signs of foul play, but authorities are investigating the circumstances of her death. The woman had reportedly been confined at a hotel by a phishing scam group in Cambodia. South Korean police believe she may have been linked to a local voice phishing organization and could have died while returning to Cambodia under the group's orders. In response to the string of incidents in Cambodia, Seoul's foreign ministry is imposing stricter travel restrictions to curb the growing job scam crisis. Starting Thursday, a level 4 travel ban, the highest on the 4-tier scale, will take effect for Cambodia's Bokor Mountain region in Kampot province, as well as the cities of Gov't and Poipet. Authorities warn that anyone who travels to or remains in areas under the level 4 ban could face legal penalties under the Passport Act. Other regions already under special advisories will maintain their current alert levels, while the rest of Cambodia will be raised from level 1 to level 2, signaling increased caution for Korean travelers. These moves highlight the government's urgency in responding to a widening transnational crime crisis that has ensnared hundreds of Koreans in Southeast Asia. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In Washington, the U.S. government shutdown has stretched into its third week, with lawmakers still deadlocked over spending and health care. Analysts warn the standoff is beginning to cloud the global economic outlook. Wednesday's ninth failed Senate vote left federal workers unpaid and vital services frozen. Key indicators like the monthly jobs report and inflation data are delayed, leaving policymakers and investors without accurate numbers. Analysts compare the disruption to a major storm, with each week shaving about 0.2 percentage points or $15 billion off quarterly growth. Looking ahead, the longer Washington remains gridlocked, the greater the risk that the U.S. data blackout becomes a drag on worldwide growth. U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed that he authorized the CIA to operate inside Venezuela. calling it a response to drug trafficking and migrant releases by President Nicolas Maduro's government. Speaking at the White House on Wednesday, Trump said U.S. forces have already carried out 5 raids at sea, killing 27 people, and that Washington is now looking at land operations. The announcement marks a rare public acknowledgement of a covert directive and a sharp escalation of pressure on Caracas. Meanwhile, Maduro's government has ordered military drills and vowed to defend Venezuela against aggression. Trump has deployed warships and submarines and fighter jets to the Caribbean as part of his anti-narcotics campaign. Israel returned 45 Palestinian bodies to Gaza on Wednesday as part of the exchange set out under the U.S.-brokered ceasefire with Hamas. The handover brings the total number of Palestinian remains released to 90, with Hamas says now delivered 2 more Israeli hostages' bodies, but says it needs specialized equipment to recover the rest. Israel officials insist the hostage mission is not complete and ordered the army to prepare in case fighting resumes. They also said Israel would reduce aid to Gaza if Hamas delays the return of the dead hostages. UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher is urging Israel to open all crossings into Gaza, warning that withholding aid cannot be used as leverage. Inside Gaza, residents say food prices have surged by about 30% as traders stockpile goods, fearing truce could collapse. Global carbon dioxide levels are at its highest ever recorded, rising by 3.5 parts per million from 2023 to 2024, the sharpest annual increase since measurements began in 1957. The World Meteorological Organization says the surge is driven by fossil fuel burning and wildfires, especially across South America. Officials warn the heat trapped by greenhouse gases is turbocharging the planet and fueling more extreme weather. Methane and nitrous oxide have also hit record highs, while the planet's natural carbon sinks, forests, land, and oceans are losing their ability to absorb emissions. The WMO says the Amazon's trees, stressed by drought and heat, are now struggling to photosynthesize, a sign that nature's defenses are faltering.
We had some picture-perfect autumn weather in the capital area yesterday, but it did not last long with evening showers. Well, more rain has been with us through the morning, then it will finally clear up by the afternoon, but I would still keep an umbrella handy just in case. The thick clouds have kept the temperatures on the warmer side for the past few weeks, but things will get much colder once the rain lets up on Sunday, going down below season norms in most areas. And this afternoon, central regions will have temperatures a few degrees lower today, topping out at 23 degrees in Seoul and Daejeon, but Gwangju still warm at 27 degrees under cloudy skies in most regions. Then get ready for another round. Rain will restart on Friday night over the central and Jeollado regions, then spread nationwide by Saturday morning. So we'll have on and off rain until Saturday afternoon. Then we can finally expect some clear skies to appear on Sunday with a sharp drop in temperatures.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.